Muskan.
I am Archie, and today we are going to watch 3 ways how Trump could strike Iran. And actually, right now, I guess nobody knows what Trump can do, and we all know about the ongoing tensions between Iran and US. So, is this actually a plan, or is this a political pressure? Maybe we all don't know.
So it will be very interesting to watch this. So let's get into the
Video.
Is gathering air power for a massive attack on Iran, possibly with the intent of regime change. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is moving toward the Middle East. Patriot and THAAD air defense systems are being deployed. Non-essential US personnel and equipment are being pulled back from exposed regional bases, and over 3 dozen US tanker aircraft and heavy lift transporters are heading there. The planning phase is now giving way to execution.
It feels like
Iran,
they're all
meanwhile,
set to
is
attack
not
on
sitting
Iran.
idly by. Russian and Chinese cargo aircraft have been making rounds into the country,
Iran is also
almost
making moves.
certainly carrying arms and ammunition. Since mid-2025, Tehran has been stockpiling arms, specifically Chinese weapons. On paper, Iran now fields top-notch air defenses, including HQ-9B missiles. In practice, however, that advantage is brittle. Air defense systems only work efficiently when layered and integrated with other systems. Iran doesn't have that. However one looks at it, the fuse is now burning. The Pentagon is just waiting for the perfect time.
They're
Attack too
waiting for
soon
it.
and Iranians will rally around the flag. Attack too late and the US will miss the momentum. Half measures won't do. This is the hinge on which decades turn, and what happens next will outlive everyone in the
Oh
room.
my god. Crying for war.
The deadly protests in Iran continue to rage on, raising the prospects of US military intervention. Internet connectivity has been largely shut down in the
Yeah,
country
I heard
since
about
January
it.
8th, which makes
Yes.
it difficult to ascertain the scale and scope of the situation. Even so, the protests are just a pretext for military action. Iranians in the streets may certainly want democracy, but Trump has no real concern for any of them, because ultimately this isn't about promoting democracy or freedom. Trump's rhetoric on Venezuela, Ukraine and Greenland shows exactly what he thinks of the liberal, rules-based order.
Yes.
Case in point, the renewed American push to bomb Iran again is not driven by a sudden crisis, least of all the current protests, but by unfinished business from the last showdown.
What?
You see, the first US attack on the Iranian nuclear sites was not quite as successful. Around 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium were unaccounted for. The Iranians had secretly relocated these months ago in anticipation of an attack. If further enriched to 90%, which is a relatively easy process, the stockpile could produce enough fissile core for 9 nuclear weapons. And as long as that stockpile
nuclear
remains
weapons.
missing, as
Oh my
long as
God. The
Iran
amount of
retains
energy
even
it
the
radiates.
slightest ability to build a bomb, the war is unfinished. Diplomats in Tehran have been trying to prevent, or at least postpone, a US attack by offering to restart negotiations with the Trump administration. If Iran
They
were to
should
offer
negotiate.
substantial concessions on its nuclear program and its missile program, it would reduce the risk of US military action. However, America's demands have expanded since the last standoff. They now include not only ending nuclear enrichment and cutting back on missile stockpiles, but also
what
getting
demand?
rid of the enriched nuclear material they have and stopping support for regional proxy groups.
Oh my
Iran
god.
is not going to meet these prerequisites.
Definitely.
And so, in the coming days and weeks, the risk of an attack on Iran will remain high. At Al Udeid Air Base in
how
Qatar,
nobody
widely
listens
regarded
to
as the
Trump, so he
largest
does these
US
things.
military base in the region with around 10,000 troops, non-essential aircraft have been moved away. This satellite imagery shows the situation on the ground. The same pullback is seen at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. You don't do
pullback?
this when a diplomatic resolution is around the corner. You clear them when you expect Iranian missiles to hit that base. For instance, Al Udeid sits less than 300 kilometers from Iran, and Shahab 3 missiles can reach it in just 4 minutes.
Oh.
The evacuation of Al Udeid and other bases is a sign that the battlefield is being cleared for a major fight.
Yes.
Okay,
However,
they are taking
the
them to
first and
safe zones.
foremost question to ask is not what the Pentagon can do, but what it seeks to achieve.
True.
Strategy must precede action. Trump's objective remains largely ambiguous. It ranges from regime change through a coup or popular uprising to pressuring Tehran into a new nuclear agreement.
Yes.
If the objective is to destroy Iran's nuclear sites and eliminate the unaccounted enriched uranium, then the mission calls for B-2 bombers, which are the only aircraft that can carry the GBU-57 bunker busters.
Oh,
If the
yeah.
end
We know
game
about
is
B-2
regime
bombers.
change, then the scope expands far beyond that. So, in the absence of clearly defined goals, the use of military force risks becoming an end in itself.
War with brakes? The
Fresh off the heels of the US raid on Venezuela, some are now speculating that the US could do a regime change operation by targeting key Iranian leaders. The belief is
the
that doing
leaders
so
straight
would
away.
Are they going to
destabilize
kidnap them
Iran's
as well?
political hierarchy and compel remaining elements to submit to American terms.
They'll compel
However,
everybody
an
to do this.
exfiltration
Feels like
mission
they have to
similar to the
surrender now.
operation that
Exactly.
captured Maduro in Caracas is
Yes.
unlikely.
We know
US
that thing.
helicopters would need to refuel inside Iranian territory due to the distance from friendly
Friendly
airspace
airspace.
and the Persian Gulf. Caracas sits close to the coast, whereas Tehran is tucked far away from the open oceans. In fact, the need for refueling is precisely what led to the failure of Operation Eagle Claw in 1980, which sought to rescue US embassy staff held hostage during the Islamic Revolution. So any overt military action against Iran would most likely take the form of assassination strikes. However,
Yes,
this
because it
approach
has been done
carries
before.
inherent
Yes.
risks. For one, Iran is ideologically entrenched, deeply so. Any kinetic attack that kills or removes a figure like the supreme leader or a senior
Okay.
military official would certainly create shock, but it would also play into the Shia Islam martyrdom culture and thereby galvanize unity. What's more, taking out the supreme leader, as much as a symbolic figure he is, wouldn't trigger the government's collapse. Iran's political machine is highly institutionalized, and the IRGC has a contingency plan to move into position and consolidate control over the clerical security elite. Once the IRGC takes power and de facto assumes guardianship of the state, they would then
Remorse,
select
justice,
a
and
new
media.
supreme leader. So, assassinating Iran's top leader would only create a short-term crisis while rallying hardliners around the flag and sparking a wider display of nationalism and unity.
Okay.
Another important consideration are the regional parameters. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and Kuwait will likely withhold airspace access for an attack on Iran. Understandably,
they'll hold it.
Iranian retaliation would target these countries,
Yeah,
and they
they
want
will.
no part in that. But at the same time, this restricts America's options to 3 approach vectors. The first corridor is from the north. Flying in from Europe, American B-2 bombers could cross international airspace over the Black Sea and enter Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. None of the Caucasian states is likely to approve, but the US could do it undetected anyway.
Yes.
After hitting their targets, the B-2 bombers could then exit the battle space by following the same route back or by flying
same.
south through the Indian Ocean.
Indian
The problem
Ocean.
with this route is that it comes awfully close to Russian airspace, and the
Yes.
Russians may be able to track the B-2 bombers and
They'll
warn
attack.
their Iranian counterparts, so it's a risky route. The second corridor is
It's
through
through
Israel,
Syria.
Jordan, and Iraq.
Yeah.
Most of the US tanker aircraft and heavy lift transporters, over 3 dozen of them, are headed toward Jordan. So this central route is the most likely.
They have to cross
Admittedly,
Iraq.
the Iraqis will withhold their airspace, but they lack the capacity to detect and track stealth aircraft. By
Oh.
using B-2, F-22 and F-35s, the
Yeah.
US could move about
US
this route and strike
Yeah.
at
Airships.
Iran
They have far better
undetected.
jets.
This is also the
US is
same
far
route
better
that
jets.
was used previously to attack Iran's nuclear sites. It's
Yeah.
tested, it works, but it's also somewhat predictable. The third corridor is through the Indian Ocean. This
what
one
will
offers
happen
the
here?
most freedom of movement, but also requires the most logistical prep work.
Yes.
Having the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group in precisely that area certainly helps. This option is also the preferred choice for regional nations because it minimizes their exposure to Iranian retaliatory strikes. What's more, by going through the south, the US
Which
could
one is
also
the
use
safest route?
conventional
Yeah.
bombers such as B-52s, thereby bringing in much more
I think
firepower.
through the Indian
The
Ocean
weight of
would be the
evidence
safe one.
suggests that
Maybe.
it could be a combination of the central and southern corridors.
Combination.
By the way,
Wow.
this video
Smart.
in no way promotes war. This is a realistic assessment based on cold calculated interests and needs without the huff and puff of morals. This is what the Americans would do because it benefits them. In no shape or form
Americans
do
will
we
always do
advocate
what
for
benefits
war.
them.
Trump may think differently, however. If he presses on and focuses on destroying Iran's nuclear sites, the attack would remain relatively contained.
Yeah.
B-2 bombers flying in and out would be enough. However, if the objective expands to regime change, then the operation takes on an entirely different nature.
Pulling
the rug.
The last and the final
If
way.
the United States decides to go for regime change in Iran, it could target IRGC infrastructure, command centers, and paramilitary officials in hopes of weakening the security forces responsible for the crackdown. Doing so would create a brief period of internal disruption and uncertainty, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't trigger meaningful negotiations or push Tehran toward collapse. The Iranians would move quickly to restore operational control and replace fallen commanders. That's what they did during the 12-day war in June. During this window of disruption, protesters may take up arms, and clashes with law enforcement could become even more violent. But it still wouldn't be enough to pose an existential threat to the government. Only a wider, sustained campaign targeting Iran's military infrastructure, security apparatus, and political leadership over an extended period of time, think of weeks, if not months,
Yeah.
could
This
threaten
will go
Tehran's survival. A one-off military strike wouldn't achieve anything, but a sustained campaign that degrades Iran's military capabilities and disrupts its
Okay, they are
security
targeting
forces
their
would
capabilities.
create a power vacuum
Weakening
within
them.
the IRGC. The remaining elements could then be coerced into negotiation and compliance. Iran's response to all this would of course be proportional to the level of damage inflicted.
Yeah.
In a low-level escalation, Iran could carry out
don't
a
know how
telegraphed
Iran would,
limited attack,
like,
such
retaliate.
as striking
Yeah.
US diplomatic or military targets in Iraq, or harassing commercial or military ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The goal would be to re-establish deterrence while avoiding a wider war. A mid-level response could involve Iran launching similarly telegraphed strikes against US military assets in the Gulf, including those in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and so on. Such a response, however, would instantly raise the risk of regional conflict. Finally, Iran's leadership could go for a high-level escalation.
We really don't want USA to attack on Iran. We really want that they could negotiate and talk to each other, because I think so talking and negotiating is the best way, because the US is planning to attack. I think this is going to increase the war into the world, and we are supporting peace.
Exactly, but the negotiations are so hardcore that what US is asking to Iran, I guess it is very tough that Iran will definitely agree on them. But these were the hypothetical situations that how in three ways how US could attack, and these were just hypothetical situations. I can imagine what Trump would be thinking right now. And like the way we saw through the second, I was more interested about the second type of way how US can be attacked through our Indian oceans or through other oceans. This was a very strategically mind mapping technique, but let's see what will happen further. So yeah, we also don't know what will actually be going to happen in the future.
And also, like, I'm quite curious, like, how Iran is going to respond on that, because America just wants them to surrender, but I don't think so they are going to surrender. So what do you think about this video? Let us know in the comment section below. So like, share, and
And subscribe. Bye.